Patricia.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted to be a co-sponsor in this debate, and I'm particularly grateful to the honourable gentleman for Weston-super-Mare and the honourable lady for Don Valley, and indeed the backbench debate committee. This debate, as has been pointed out, one of the disadvantages of speaking so far down the list, this debate, as has been pointed out, is long overdue and is ultimately a debate about how we can empower consumers as they too often face the injustice of energy prices. We know that the average annual domestic gas and electricity bills in Scotland have increased by up to 114% and 50% respectively between 2004 and 2015. But the cost that consumers pay varies depending on their methods of payment over which the consumer does not always have control. On average, electricity and gas consumers across Scotland using standard credit and prepayment meters face approximately 10% higher bills than those able to use direct debit. The cost of a unit of gas is similar across Scotland and the rest of the British energy market for domestic consumers. However, the unit price of electricity differs considerably within Scotland. Consumers in the north of Scotland pay between 8 and 9% more per kilowatt hour of electricity, depending on payment type, than on the average in the rest of Britain. Big Six energy companies supply gas and electricity to over 50 million homes, with a market share of 85% of UK domestic customers. It is the case that the Competition and Markets Authority last year completed a 2-year inquiry into the energy market, and the hope is that costs could be driven down by increasing competition between the suppliers and helping more customers switch to better deals. But as we've heard, there is a problem with this. The problem is that the Competition and Markets Authority found that the vast majority of people don't switch providers. And even worse, 70% of all Big Six customers are on the default standard variable tariff, which means that 16 million homes are paying more for their energy than they should be. And as the honourable member for Weston-super-Mare pointed out, loyalty is treated as something to be exploited, not something to be rewarded. The premium that standard variable tariff consumers pay over those who switch has tended to increase over time. In 2008, it was less than £100 each year, but by mid-2015, it stood at £330, and currently it stands at around £230. And in all that time, rates of switching are no higher. So clearly, as the motion sets out, the way to protect consumers cannot be done simply by encouraging them to switch suppliers. Much more than that is required. Those most likely to be on standard variable tariffs are more likely to be older, they are more likely to be disabled, they are more likely to be on low incomes, they are more likely to be living in rented accommodation, and they are more likely to be consumers without internet access. And those on standard variable tariffs did not see their bills fall by much at all when the cost of providing energy dropped in 2014-15. Such savings as were available were only passed on to the consumers who were active switchers. And not all consumers can engage in the switching process, so clearly suppliers need to do more to ensure that these customers are not trapped in poor deals. The existing market does provide scope for households to save money on their energy bills by switching, but a low level of consumer engagement in the market still persists. Indeed, the Competition and Markets Authority found in its investigations that one of the main issues is a lack of engagement in the markets on the part of many customers, which suppliers are able to exploit by charging high prices. 34% of domestic energy customers had never considered switching supplier, with 56% saying they didn't know if it were possible or if they had done so in the past. But one issue of concern that I really want to draw attention today in the context of this debate is that switching can currently take up to 21 days. And that is a significant period of time during which a consumer who may be thinking about switching may be concerned, there's fear that something could go wrong in that extended period, for which I don't believe there is sufficient justification. One result of this is that energy is becoming increasingly unaffordable for consumers, and between 2004 and 2014, average annual domestic gas prices rose by around 125% in real terms. Significantly, those consumers who are engaged in the market are typically higher income earners. They have access to both a mains gas supply and internet access, so that they can much more easily carry out comparison shopping. And of course, they have the ability to pay by direct debit. And this is yet more evidence that the way to protect consumers simply cannot be done by encouraging them to switch suppliers. And of course, as we've heard today, energy efficient measures are of course important, and the Scottish Government has done a lot of work on this and is driving down fuel poverty, although that still remains stubbornly high. But ultimately and fundamentally, what we need is effective regulation of the retail energy market, and to work collaboratively with energy suppliers to explore ways of helping low-income households with their energy bills. We need a market that works equally well for all energy consumers, regardless of where they are in the income scale. It's going to be really important to closely monitor the energy regulator Ofgem's widespread review, which is currently undertaking of its consumer regulation framework. But there must be a case, given what we've heard today, there must be a case for the safeguard tariff, a limit on the amount that prepayment customers are charged, for that to be expanded to include those consumers on the standard variable tariff eligible for the warm home discount on a credit meter. I think it's also very important that the Government sets targets for suppliers to significantly reduce the number of consumers on standard variable tariffs by 2020. And if these suppliers cannot or do not meet these targets, then consideration has to be given to broadening the safeguard tariff to protect other standard variable tariff customers. And these are issues I would very much like the Minister to address today. Just because consumers, very often vulnerable consumers, are not able to negotiate the process of switching, this doesn't mean that they should be left at the mercy of a market which punishes them for that. Energy is an essential utility, and much more must be done to protect those who are currently being very poorly served by it and overcharged by it. Doing nothing, as I think we would all agree, doing nothing is not an option. And I hope the Minister will address the concerns that I and others have raised today and reassure this House that protecting consumers and putting energy companies on notice that things cannot and must not continue as they have been.